All right, and we are live. Second brief moment to wait for the other participants first. So, welcome to Python R. I am your host for tonight. I'm Ariel. So, before we start, we'd like to observe our code of conduct. So, first, we value the participation of each member of the community and want all members to have an enjoyable, fulfilling experience. Accordingly, all members are expected to show respect and courtesy to other members at all Python PH events. If a participant engages in a harassing behavior, the webinar organizers may take any action they deem appropriate, including warning the offender or expulsion from the event. If you believe that someone is violating the code of conduct or have any other concerns, please contact a member of the Python PH Code of Conduct work group immediately. They can be reached by emailing board@python.ph. So first, we'd like to introduce ourselves. So we are Python PH. So Python PH is a non-profit, volunteer-run organization dedicated to support and facilitate the growth of the community of Python programmers in the Philippines. So Python PH started in 2012 when we held the first ever Python convention called PyCon. Since then, we're able to organize a lot of meetups, trainings, and conventions. As per our current initiatives, we have the Work from Home Pythonista. Professionals and enthusiasts share and talk about Python. And our next work from Home Pythonista this October 29 at 5 p.m. on our Python PH YouTube channel. So for tonight, we have the Python R wherein we share interesting topics around Python. The next is the public training wherein we offer low-cost Python trainings covering various topics. We have an upcoming online public training session this November. So if you're interested, you may sign up using the link on the screen. So for tonight's event, it's called Python R. So it's a 1-hour brownbag session wherein we share interesting topic around Python. So for October, we've scheduled 3 sessions. So it's every Thursday at 7 p.m. So last week, we had the Let's Create Animated Memes Using Python and MoviePy. Then for tonight, we'll have the API development using Flask. Then for next week, we have the data science using Python. So for tonight's session, we have Mr. Jeff Paredes, a software engineer and core volunteer of Python PH to discuss API development using Flask. So Sir Jeff, the floor is yours.
There you go. Thank you so much, Ariel. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the event and the topic for today. Let me just introduce myself. I'm Jeff Paredes. I'm currently a software engineer, backend software engineer, specializing on API development. I'm also a core volunteer of the Python Philippines, which is the Kaizen team. So for today, we will be discussing the API development using Flask. Let me just share the screen for my presentation. There you go. Yun. All right. Kamusta naman everyone? So feel free to give message dito sa messages natin sa Zoom, and you can also comment in our YouTube live. All right, everyone. Can you see my screen? All right, I think it's sharing right now. All right. So for today, we will be talking about the API development using Flask. And there's a bunch of things that we're also talking about. This will be a beginner introduction with API development. So for the first, let's ask the question, what are APIs? Just a moment. Okay. So API stands for Application Programming Interface, or API. In the context of APIs, the word application refers to any software with a distinct function. So API is a set of rules and function that defines how applications or devices can connect to and communicate with each other. So for example, here's the high-level details of how API works. So for example, pwedeng may mga users, mobile applications or servers na kumonect sa API, and they communicate via our request and response details. So there's a different, there's a part of the APIs, for example, an interface. For example, an interface can be a thought of as a contract as a service or contract of a service between two applications. So this contract defines the two servers that communicate with each other, which is the request and response. And we have API documentations. Our developers create API documentations so they can structure those requests and response. Let's go with the types of API. Yeah. So ano ba yung mga types of API na meron tayo currently in the industry? So maraming types of API na meron tayo sa industry, but for now, this is the most popular. For example, this is the SOAP API. So the SOAP API stands for Simple Object Access Protocol. So SOAP APIs these are APIs that use an XML messages. So this is a flexible API that was popular in the past. So currently, mga industry natin ngayon, meron pa rin silang ginagamit na SOAP API. So especially sa mga banks, sa digital services, and sa mga traditional banking systems. We also have WebSockets API. This supports two-way communication between client apps and server. So this modern API, it also uses a JSON object to pass data. And yung main difference ng WebSocket API is that it supports two-way communication between clients and apps. So think about chats. So heavily used yung WebSocket sa chats, sa trading, sa votes, wherein merong two-way communication na magsasubmit lang na message and then meron return agad. So ganun yung nature ng WebSocket API. And of course, the most popular one is the REST APIs that is being found on the web today. So these are the most popular and flexible APIs that we can find today. And the client sends requests to the server and to the server data, and then the server uses the client to start internal functions and return an output data back to the client. So let's look at the REST APIs and ano yung mga details ng REST APIs na how is it called REST APIs? All right, what are REST APIs? So REST API stands for representational state transfer. So it defines functions like get, put, delete, etc., or post that the client or users can use to access server data using a URI or URL. If you're not familiar with URI, URI is Uniform Resource Identifier, and then URL is Uniform Resource Locator. So the clients or the users server exchange data using HTTP protocol. I'm very sure familiar kayo sa HTTP and HTTPS. And the main feature of REST API is that it's statelessness. So statelessness means that the server do not have or does not save client data between requests. The client requests to the server are similar to the URLs that you type on a browser to visit a website. For example, if you visit python.ph, you're doing a get request to that endpoint or to that server. And the response from that server is a plain data without the typical graphical rendering of a web page. That's how REST API works. But yeah, for web application websites, it has a graphical rendering of web page. But for REST APIs, it returns data such as JSON objects. Okay, so now siguro naisip ko kung how does an API works. So ito yung example ng high-level diagram ng API. So for example, meron tayo ditong URI ng isang API that we can search an image of a cat. And then if you type this URL in a browser, you're just basically doing a get request. So ang API, ito yung magsaserve sa atin as a communicator between the servers and the database kung saan nakalive yung mga images na yun. And meron mga sinusunod na protocol yung API, such as for example, for this kind of request, we can attach a variable. For example, I want to search a cat that is cute. So let's just put cute equals yes. So this API, for example, will return a JSON body response. So ito yung sample. So meron yung ID, URL, width and height. So this API is very much basic. So it returns a URL of an image of a cat. Tapos ito yung image ng cat. Pero may dog syempre. Ayan. And I also wanted to focus in the response. So ito yung para mga details ng response ng isang API. Meron tayong HTTP status code. For example, here we have 200, which means okay, in-accept ng API yung request, and then return siya ng body, which is a body is a JSON object containing the details that we want to look at. All right. So let's look at the composition of a URI. So sana nakakahabol pa ang lahat. Ayan, so meron tayo ditong URI or API from thecatapi.com. So basically, this API will shows us a collection of URL of an image of a cat. So I'm pretty sure familiar kayo sa HTTPS. So this is the protocol of this API. So it lives in a secure port or HTTPS. And we have the domain. For example, for this API, we have the API.thecatapi.com. Tapos, we will using the path. So meron tayo sa API tinatawag na path wherein we can define kung ano yung mga set of instruction na meron yung path na yun. So for example, ito, yung sa catapi.com, they have a version 1 API. So it's indicate here /v1. And then we are looking for images data. So /images and /search, meaning we're trying to search data. And we can also pass parameters like this one. We call this query strings. So, importante yung query strings para sa mga APIs kasi ginagamit nila yon for like identifying kung ano yung filters or hinahanap natin dun sa API na yun. So for example, here it will return an image of a cat, and that is also cute equals yes. Yan. So, punta naman tayo sa API response. Ano ba yung mga API responses na binabato ng REST API? So, kung nakopy nyo yung URL no, sa inyong browser and then tinype nyo yun, and then punta kayo sa Google Chrome, for example, and then open the developer tools. So, dun sa network tab, pwede nyo makita dun yung kung ano yung mga ginagawa ng browser nyo, kung ano yung tinatawag ng API, kung ano yung mga response or request and response na ginagawa ng browser nyo. So for example, here, if I open the Google Chrome and open the networking tab, and then I try to input this request URL, you can see here that we have a request called a GET request. And the response is we have a status code 200, meaning, okay, in-accept ng server, ng API yung request natin. And ito yung originating remote address. And we also, headers are also important. So ito namang mga headers, it will define the data that the server is trying to return to us. So for example, here, it returned a JSON object. So ang content type nung headers is applications/JSON. And then meron tayong mga ibang informations, for example, date kung kailan siya ni-return, or kung meron ba tayong authentication or cache policies, etc., etc. So, punta tayo sa status code. So, I'm not sure kung I think maraming nag-join dito or nag-register ng mga beginners sa Python or maybe sa API. So, baka nalilito kayo doon sa mga terminologies. So, so for example sa status code, sa response ng status code, meron tayong marami actually yung status code, pero ito lang yung pinaka basic status code na dapat nyo maintindihan to understand what are the responses from an API. So for example, a 4xx, or for example, we have our status code, a return status code from an API 401 or 402 or 405, 404. That means that our request has a problem or you have a problem. Kapag naman 501, 503, that means a server has a problem or my problem or you may problem to sa API. So nag-return siya ng 500. So it means 500 means internal server error. 4xx means a bad request. And kung makareceive naman tayo ng 200, just like earlier, so that means no problem with the API responses. So maraming type of API responses with the 2xx response code. Meron tayong 201 which is created, 200 which is okay, and 202 which means content created, something like that. All right. Ano kaya status niya? Okay. So what is Python Flask? So punta na tayo dito sa sa main topic natin, kung ano ba yung Python Flask. Okay. Let me just open this. So what is Python Flask? So Python Flask is a web framework. It is a lightweight WSGI or Web Server Gateway Interface web application framework. And it is designed to make getting started quickly and easy with the ability to scale up to complex applications or APIs. So hindi lang ginagamit yung Flask for APIs, ginagamit din siya, since WSGI siya, ginagamit din siya to render web pages and other types of WSGI web applications. And yung Flask is developed by Armin Ronacher. So siya yung nag-start ng Armin Ronacher, who led the team of international Python enthusiasts called POCO. And sila yung nag-create ng Flask that is based on Wurzer, which is an WSGI toolkit, and Jinja, which is the template engine for rendering web pages. So Python Flask has many cool features like URL routing, template engine, and many other stuff that you can integrate with Python Flask or Python library. You can integrate that with Python Flask. So ito yung example ng Jinja. Kung for example, nag-render kayo ng isang web page, ganito yung example ng web page, and then you can use the Python to render an HTML web page, and that is powered by Jinja. And yung Workslog naman is a URL WSGI utility that you can use to like create a functionalities in API. So for example, ito yung mga base URL, base function na pwede nyo gamitin to create your APIs. So Workslog is a WSGI toolkit that implements, for example, request, response object, and utility functions such as these. And this enables a web framework to build on it. And the Flask is heavily dependent on the Wurzer as one of its bases. All right. So punta na tayo dito sa mga open API na meron tayo sa web, no? So there's a lot of APIs. So there's APIs everywhere, anywhere. Even yung sa phone nyo, kumukonect yan sa API, yung browser nyo, yung laptop nyo. I think even yung mga Internet of Things, or baka meron kayong smart light bulb na kumukonect sa API, meron kayong smartwatch na kumukonect sa API. So there's a lot of APIs And I think the world is now being powered by APIs. Ito yung mga APIs na um, publicly available. So pwede nyo ma-access to. So meron tayong, for example, the Twitter API, which is allows you to do things like displaying your latest tweets. And on your website, we have Google Maps that allows you to do all sorts of things in terms of maps on your web pages. Meron din tayong Facebook APIs. So you can use the Facebook APIs to access its ecosystem for your apps. For example, if you have an app that wants to connect with Facebook login, you can use the Facebook Suite API. So meron tayong Telegram API. So it allows you to embed content from Telegram channels on your website in addition to providing support for bots. So yung mga gumagawa ng bots, madalas ginagamit nila yung Telegram APIs, or for example, yung Discord APIs or Slack APIs, ginagamit nila for bots. And of course, we have YouTube API, which allows you to embed YouTube videos on your site. You can also use the YouTube API to download videos or download music or build playlists and more. So marami pa tayong APIs. We have Pinterest that provides you pins, including them, the Pinterest including them on your website. Then you can also use CoinMarketCap API. So CoinMarketCap API is used naman to retrieve a cryptocurrency data such as price, volume, market cap, and exchange data. And you can all do that using Python, these APIs. And of course, meron tayong GitHub APIs wherein you can search for GitHub repositories. All right, so let's jump on the Flask demo. So kung meron kayong mga, ginagamit ko kasi sa software engineering or sa day-to-day work is Visual Studio. So if you have Visual Studio and you want to go with how I demo it, so please open your Visual Studio. I'll be just sharing my entire screen so we can switch back to the presentation. All right, so we have the Visual Studio here. So kung i-open nyo yung Visual Studio nyo, meron actually si Visual Studio na built-in capability where you can do Python inside Visual Studio without installing the necessary stuff of Python. So ang tawag doon is dev container, and pwede nyo gamitin yung dev container as long as you have Docker desktop, for example, in Windows or Mac OS installed on your laptops or computers. So since dev container is powered by Docker engine. So for example, here, if we want to try a Python environment or dev container, we can click this button. And then let's try to search for try development container samples. And then meron tayong iba't ibang language dito. We will pick Python. Ayun. So nandito pala yung original code ko. So okay. Okay, here di ko na i-discuss yung capabilities nung dev container. You can check on that dun sa website ni Visual Studio Code. But basically yung dev container meron siyang Docker file engine na magi-install na nung Docker OS dito sa VS Code. And then siya na rin yung mag-i-install ng mga other dependencies, including yung mga libraries and extensions na we have in this Python Visual Studio Code. So itong sample ni Microsoft Visual Studio Code, meron na tong Flask application. So meron siyang app.py, and then meron siyang requirements.txt kung saan nyo nilalagay yung mga libraries na gusto nyong i-install. So for this sample, meron na tayong Flask. And kapag niran yung dev container, automatically i-install nyo na agad yung nandito sa requirements.txt. All right, let's jump on the app.py, which is basically ito yung main application natin. Okay, let's deep dive on how we use Flask. So for example, here, meron tayong file. And then ang first na gagawin natin is, of course, to import the Flask. Okay? And upon importing the Flask, we can create an object called app and then reference the app on the class called the class or the Flask. And then that's it. Let's just remove this. And then that's it. Once we have an app object, we can now start creating our routing functions. So for example, here we have this app.route, which is slash. So basically what this will do is that it will create a Flask server or a web server. And then we can define kung ano yung mga path na gusto natin gamitin for this web server. So meron ako ditong ito yung built-in na nakalagay dito sa app.py. So for example, meron tayong hello function. And this will return a static content file called index.html, which is nandito sa static. And basically it is an HTML file. Ito lang yung content ng HTML file. So it's an HTML web page. So let's try to run this application. All right, it's running now. So you can run pala yung yung application by doing Python space app.py, and then it will start serving a Flask application called app, and naka-turn on yung debugger function ng Flask ko. So it will reload the application every time na merong changes. So yan. So meron na tayong application port running on 5000. So ito for example yung domain na gagamitin ko. So since nasa local ko lang siya, nasa local host ko lang siya, sa laptop ko lang siya, I can use this server to initiate my functions. So I'll try to access this. Open ko lang yung actually I can open this using the simples. There you go. So for example here, ano yung nangyari dun sa Flask app natin? So sinerve niya yung static HTML nandun sa index.html natin. And ito yung contents dun sa HTML file. VS Code can do that. And yes, it can. Okay, and then it serves its web application dun sa port 5000. So it's very much similar to sa ginawa nating path, which is the slash. There you go. Okay, so ito yung example na how do you render web page using Flask. Pero today, I will show you how do we create an API using this Flask application. Okay, meron ako dito mga functions na ginawa initially. For example, here, nag-create ako ng another path, which is /user. So basically, what I wanted here is that I want to return a name and an email using this API. So nag-create ako ng function called user, and then it will return a JSON file. Initially, we wanted to return the data as, for example, JSON.dumps. Yeah, and then if we try to query that here, there you go. So, ayun, ganun lang kasimple yung API natin, /user. And then mag-return siya ng details na nilagay natin dito sa function na to. But first, let's check the response of the server. There you go. No, sana nakikita niyo to, no? Pwede ba ito i-zoom? Ayun. So for example, if I reload this page, pwede nyo makita yung mga different requests na ginagawa ng browser nyo on the backend side. So for example, here I try to access the /user API. Nag-return siya ng 200 okay, meaning okay yung communication natin, nag-return siya ng data. And if we look at here, it says that the content type of this is text or HTML. So, importante sa API na meron tayong protocols for such as this, yung content type, kasi tinitreat yan ng mga applications, ng mga servers, ng mga client apps as a content or the type of data that they're trying to process. So, for example, here, since we return HTML, so mahirapan yung mga applications na basahin yung JSON object natin. So, we wanted this to return in a JSON object. And to do that, meron tayong mga built-in libraries that we can use. For example, dito, meron tayong JSONify that we can use. So let's just change this to JSONify. There we go. All right. So kung tama yung function natin, yan, mag-return siya ng JSON object. Kung napansin nyo, nag-iba yung response kasi iba yung response ng browser ko depende dun sa content type na ni-return ng API. Ayan. So if you look again at the response headers, we have a content type which is an application/JSON. So, ayan yung mga responses na binibigay ng API. Meron diyang date, kung ano yung server, kung saan galing yung data, and then yung content length or in bytes. And then, marami pang ibang pwedeng ilagay dun sa response headers. So now, JSON object na yung ni-return ng API natin. So basically, maintindihan na siya ng mga application na gagamit ng API natin. Alright. So, mag-jump in na tayo dun sa iba't ibang HTTP methods or mga functions na madalas na ginagamit sa REST API. So if you remember earlier, we have different types of HTTP methods. The most common HTTP methods are get, put, post, and delete. So ginagamit yung mga terms na yun. For example, if you want to query a records, if you want to create a record, or update or delete a record. So for example, here, I created a sample snippet on how we can use or leverage the method. So to do that, I will demonstrate a function that returns a cut details. So meron tayo, of course, again, dito decorator. And yung path na gagamitin ko is /cut. By default, if you use this function or decorator, by default, get yung gagamitin niyang method, pero pwede niyong palitan yan using this parameter. So we'll set method equals to get. And this function, yung cut function, basically I wanted to return a details of a cut. So we have name and type, which is cut, and then color is orange. So let's try this API /cut. There we go. So hindi supported yata nung browser ko yung emoji. But yep, nag-return siya nung cut na kailangan natin. So for example here, if I wanted to use the postman. So ito palang postman, kung hindi kayo familiar with postman. Postman is used to like create or to start creating APIs, documentation, and environment using APIs. So yung Postman, meron siyang web browser application siya, meron din siyang desktop application. And then you can try different things in terms of API development. So for example here, ito yung API ko. And ito yung ginawa nating function, which is /cut, or ito yung ginawa nating API. So let's try to get this. Yan. So nag-return na siya ng tama. again, ito yung mga status code na nire-return ng isang API. So meron tayong status code which is okay. And then nag-return din siya ng mga headers. Here, makikita natin yung iba't ibang headers na return ng API natin. And yung body request which is a JSON object na nireturn ng API natin. Okay. So, yan yung capability ng get method. Usually, yan yung ginagamit for querying of data or getting one single data. So, let's jump on the question, paano tayo mag-create ng cat? Diba? Nakapag-query tayo ng cat, it's very static, ni-return niya lang yung details ng cat. Try naman natin mag-create ng cat. For example, usually yung pag-create ng data sa Flask or sa API sa industry, meron yung database to create a data. But for now, we will be using a simple text file. So meron akong kinreate ditong another function called createCat. And yung ginamit kong path for this is /create-cat. And yung method na gagamitin ko dito is put to tell yung mga developers, yung mga users na kapag tinawag mo tong endpoint na to and then yung method na ginamit mo is put, mag-create ka ng cat. And yung function na to, mag-accept siya ng data from a payload from a user or a server. And para makuha natin yung mga data na yun, meron tayong mga built-in libraries na mga gamit for Flask. For example, meron tayong request na may import nyo using Flask. So, ayan, ganito siya simple i-import. So, from Flask and import request. Yan, ganyan lang siya. Or pwede rin naman itong nasa taas. Okay, now let's try to create a cat. So, if we want to get the details of the request from the user, we just use the requested data. So, yung requested data, ito yung payload na binibigay ng user. And of course, we wanted to transform this in a JSON object since the data contains the requested data contains a string of payload, and we will save that on the record object. Okay, and then let's try to print this record in this line. Now, ang next natin gagawin is mag-check tayo ng file natin. So, yung ginamit kong storage or temporary file is data.txt. Pwede ring JSON or kung ano yung mas strip niya, di ba? Okay, ito yung pag-read ng file using open. So open yung file folder and then we will be using R which means read. We will read the file and let's use that as file. And then iset natin yung data. Gusto natin basahin yung data na nandito sa data.txt and to do that, we will call the file.read. So, kung merong mga laman yung data na yon, it will store that data in a string format sa data object natin. And kung merong data or kung walang data, mag-create tayo ng record. So, create tayo ng object na nagko-contain ng list. So, ito list yan. And then, lagay natin yung payload ni user, which is record. Else, kung wala naman, or kung may data yung file natin, yung temporary file natin, we load that data into a records object. And then, since naka-JSON object na tong records natin, we will add yung payload na binigay ni user para mag-append dun sa records. Yan. The last thing is we wanted to update the file, and by doing that, we will open again the file. But this time we will do write operation. So ito yung ginamit natin, W. And ito yung function to write the data to the file. So file.write and then convert natin yung records natin into string JSON. And gusto ko mag-indent tayo ng 2 spaces. All right. And then after that, since meron naman tayong record object, which is the JSON object, we can just return that to the user na, hey, ito yung list of data na meron tayo. All right. Let's try to save this, and this should create an API called createCat. Sana yun? Ayun. So let's try to slash create cat. So ito yung function natin kanina. And yung method natin is put and maglagay tayo ng data dun sa file. Remember, wala pa tayong data dun sa file or pwede natin actually change to. Meron ba kayong masasuggest na pangalan ng cat? Ano pangalan ng cat nyo? Kuting. Kuting. Anong kulay ng cat mo? Let's try ginger. Black. Yeah. Ay, cat pa rin pala to. Yeah. Pero dito yung color niya is black. So, let's try to send the request. Ayun. So mukhang tinanggap naman ng API Flask natin yung request. And I believe na-create na siya ng another data dito dun sa file natin called black, kuting, tapos black. So meron din ako nakitang ginger, sabi ni Query ko. And then let's try, anong kulay nito? Let's say white. Yeah. Yan, meron na tayong white. And then, meron pa ako nakita tagpi. Anong kulay ng tagpi? Tagpi din ba? Okay. Yan. So now, we should see a data dun sa ano natin, dito sa file natin. And then, of course, paano naman natin ngayon makikita yung laman ng data natin? Pero pang Catherine, ba ng cut mo? Catherine. Anong kulay nito? Brown. Alright. So, nag-create tayo ng mga data, pero paano naman natin siya i-calculate? So, try natin siyang i-search. So, ito meron akong kinreate na another function called search cat. Yeah, I created a new. All right. So I created a function called search cat, and then this function I wanted it to search for a cat on our data. So I wanted to get the parameters from the request. For example, kung meron tayong query strings, we can get the data from the query string using the get.args and then get the value of the parameters. So for example, I'm expecting a name query string. And so para naman to query the data on our file, we wanted to open it and we wanted to read it again. And for this, we will store the data on our data object. And we will convert it in a JSON data so we can process it. So ilagay ko siya, I put the data on the records object. And then I will try to search every details on the records object. So for example, I have a loop here that says for each item in the records, or let's say called record. And then let's search for a name which is equal to the name that you've given to the API. So if the record name or the record's name, if a record name is equal to the name that we provided, return that record. If not, stop the loop and then return, I can't find that data. All right, let's try to search for a cat. And I'm going to use a get request for this. So searching and querying, usually get method yung ginagamit natin. And of course, I wanted to search for example, ano yung mga pangalan kanina? Tagpi. Ayun, we found Tagpi. Let's try to search Catherine. There we go, we found Catherine, which is a brown cat. And let's find Ming Ming. There we go, we found Ming Ming, which is an orange cat. All right. So if you wanted, for example, to delete a record, we do that using a method called delete. So let's try to create a new function. Let's copy all of these, or So to speed up our process, so I wanted to delete a cat. And the method we will be using is delete. And the function I wanted to be delete cat. For the delete operation, so we wanted to get the request data from the user. So if we wanted to delete the data, we wanted to request to delete those. And so let's try to create an object called new records. So here we will store the new records after the delete operation happened. And let's try to read the data again. And then let's convert that record into a JSON object. There we go. And let's search for the data. I'm going to use the loop. Let's try to search that data in the records for records in records. And then if the name of the record is equivalent to the, let's use R here, or item. There we go. So we have the records of the data from the data, and then we wanted to search for that data using this for loop. And if ito yung gagamitin natin for the request of the user, for example, the record, if the item in the records is equivalent to the name of the item or the record that we are trying to delete, let's try to continue. And then append record or append. Yeah. There we go. So basically what we'll do is that it will skip the thing that we are trying to delete, and then it will append everything that is existing, or kung ano man yung mga data na naiwan dito sa records natin. So we have the new records. The new records contains the data that doesn't have the record that we were trying to delete. So ito na yan, new records. And then again, we will try to write the data, the new data. And for that, we will going to use this snippet again, and we will store the new records data. And then after that, we will return the record that we have deleted, or we can actually use the new records data, for example. Yeah. Okay, let's try that. Hopefully, wala tayong errors on this. So let's try to delete Ming Ming. So I'm not going to delete your cat. I'm not deleting my cat. I'm just removing Ming Ming from the list. So let's try to delete cat. Oops, method not allowed. Yeah, because I've used get. So ito yung mangyayari kapag kinol nyo yung API that doesn't support those HTTP methods. Remember, we're using delete statement here. So there you go. So we just remove Ming Ming from the list. Actually, ang dami natin kinreate na Ming Ming dito. So ang daming Ming Ming na lumabas. So let's try to remove again Ming Ming. Yeah. Dami. Ang daming Ming Ming na lumabas. Kasi wait lang. Yeah. So I need to place si Catherine pala yung na-delete ko, no? Hindi ko pala ginamit yung parameters dito, yung query string parameter. So i-delete natin si Ming Ming from the body. So we are expecting actually a requested data which is inside the body. So yun yung nakalimutan ko. So let's try to delete Mingming. Yan. Wala na si Mingming. Mingming is now gone. All right. So, and then if I try again, yeah. So here's the list of data that we have now that is left on our data file. So I think that's it. I think I'm running out of time. So for this, we've covered about how we can use Flask to create an API, how to query a data, how to return a data, and I've also shown you how to query a record and delete a record and create a record using a simple text file. But in a real world situation, you will be using a database such as, for example, a Postgres database, a MySQL database to store and query those data. And if you would like to continue this API development using Flask or Python, I highly suggest you register on our upcoming public training, which will talk about API development in general, and we will also talk about the different Python functionalities for beginners. And we will start providing you trainings or tutorials on how you can use Flask or API development and databases in general. Okay, so before I end this tutorial, I wanted to tell you that, or I wanted to inform everyone that you don't just create an API. So let's still follow the basic security best practices. And ito yung mga security best practices or top vulnerabilities that we have with API developments. And you can check that on OWASP top 10. And for other references that I use, you can check here. So what is API by AWS, REST APIs by IBM, and check also the list of public APIs that we have on GitHub and the references of our APIs that Mozilla Firefox can also use. All right, thank you so much everyone for this API development. We're now on our Q&A portion of the event. So if you have questions, so feel free to chat this on our Zoom channels, and you can also chat your questions on our YouTube live event.
All right. Thanks, Sir Jeff, for that wonderful discussion. Now we're moving to the Q&A portion of this event. So anyone, if you have any questions about Flask to Sir Jeff, please ask it on the chat. Also, if you enjoy the show or want to leave some feedback, so feel free to fill out the form. You can access it by scanning the QR code on the screen. So question. So we have a question from Sir Nino. So he asks, when to use put and post? What is the difference between the two?
All right. So usually yung mga standard APIs natin or industry best practices is we use put to insert a data or create a data, while we use a post to update a data.
All right. So we have another question earlier from Ariel. So he asked, what's a dev container? So is it similar to the virtual environment? So as we see, you use some sort of container in your Visual Studio.
Yep. Yung dev container, it is a built-in capability or features of VS Code. So it's very similar with virtual environment, but I think sa Python, it is using virtual environment means that we are creating a set of environment on our Python, but sa dev container, meaning we are creating a workspace or a virtual Docker or OS inside our VS Code. So meron na siyang mga Python libraries na nandun, depende dun sa gagamitin nating dev container. And you can also check other features ng dev container on Python or on the VS Code website. So it's very powerful, and it's easy to develop using the dev container, since you just need a Docker desktop and then click the dev container, and then you can get started as easy as that.
All right. So another one. So Sir Alvin from YouTube asked, which is better, app that sends static file or the render template function of Flask?
I'm sorry, ano ulit?
So app that is sends static file or the render template from Flask. So as we see, you rendered some HTML assets
Yep. For dun sa initial try
from the
Python
static
dev
folder.
container. Yeah. I just rendered a static HTML file, but since Flask has a WSGI and it has a Jinja compatibility, you can actually render dynamic web pages using Flask. So you can like render a pages depending on your data, kung ano man yung data na um, dynamically changes depende dun sa template na gagamitin nyo. And then, yeah, yung Jinja is yung very much supported dun sa web page rendering dynamically.
All right. So Alfonso asks, do you have any recommended library for API development other than Flask?
Yep, marami tayong mga web framework and libraries that we can use to develop an API. So meron tayong Django, meron tayong Fast API. You can also create your own API using the request library of Python. So ayun yung mga iba't ibang ginagamit natin sa industry and how we develop an API using Python.
Right. Then and another one from Sir Nino. If the content type that is returned of the API is text or HTML, can we use JSON that loads to convert it to be utilized further or no?
Actually, kasi yung Flask, ang return type niya dun sa function dapat is a string. So if you use JSON that loads, that means that it's a JSON object, so it won't work. So that's why we use the JSONify function to convert that JSON into string and to tell Flask that we are returning a JSON object.
All right. So another one. So Ariel asks, how can we organize multiple APIs in your project?
Yep. Yun for advanced for advanced development na yung multiple API. So with Python, you can follow yung mga object-oriented programming practices wherein you can create controllers, for example, accounts controller, wherein nandun nakastore lahat yung mga APIs for accounts. You can also create a new file called login controller wherein nandun lahat ng controller for processing the login APIs and so much more. So meron tayong mga Flask library or templates na makikita sa GitHub that we can follow to at least try those structure on how we can create a better and has a best practices in developing API using Flask.
All right. So another question is, can we get the code presented in this meeting?
Yep, I think Ariel, i-upload naman natin sa GitHub repository ng Python yung mga files, including the source code, including the presentations. And I think I will email as well yung mga resources na we use on this topic, since meron naman tayong list of, or you have the email address that we can send those resources.
Okay, so I think this could be the last one. So is it possible to use MongoDB as a database?
Oo naman, syempre. So, marami tayong library ngayon na gumagamit na, or may mga libraries sa Python that you can use to access MongoDB. So, yeah, you can definitely use MongoDB for the database on your APIs. So, Sir Sony actually type on the Zoom chat yung GitHub repository na doon ko i-upload yung mga resources and yung mga source code. So, here's the GitHub link.
All right. Okay. So I think there's another question. So will there be a topic or webinar like this for Django? Currently, hopefully we'll have. So depends if we have the resource speaker to conduct the brownbag session for Django. So maybe in the future we'll announce it on the Python PH group. So yeah, someone asked Sir Alvin again. So as if there's a part 2 for the API development, we'll get back to you guys. So we'll post it on our Facebook group about our further events. So I think that's it for the Q&A.
Siguro
So do you have
I can
feedback
share screen
to
the GitHub URL. So ito yung GitHub URL ng ating repository. So you can screenshot that or you can revisit that on our YouTube live channel. And yeah, dito natin i-upload yung mga source code and other presentations.
all right, guys. So you can access that the Python PH GitHub account. So I think that's it for the Q&A. So again, I would like to thank everyone for joining this event. So for our upcoming events, so we have the work from home Pythonista. So we're already on our 19th episode. So coming this October 29 at 5 p.m. on our Python PH YouTube channel. Then for the last one of Python R this October. So next week we'll have the data science using Python. So take note of that. So then for public training, so if you know someone, if you or you know someone that is a beginner programmer, would like to know more about Python, we have an upcoming public training this November 13, 20, and 27. You may, if you're interested, you may sign up on the link. All right. So that's it. So guys, thank you for attending this session, and thanks to Jeff for that wonderful presentation. So if you have any feedbacks, you may fill it out using this link.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Ariel and Sir Sony.
Thanks, guys.